Hello, this is a video of the council meetings where they're talking about the flood protection. Just pay very attention to how they talk about Valley Green and the costs associated with. As there's other things like Grassman Park, stuff like that that the city's done that only benefit a certain number of residents and are quite expensive. But
We listen to discussion along the way.
Councilmember Gable, don't even have to look at them.
So, I have a handful of things. The 1.3, well, that hasn't changed since the last time we asked you to go back and look how much you can get.
The January work session memo, we also had, I want to say, there was general tax levy funding, and that money was taken from that little piece and put towards the special assessment account.
Really, that hasn't changed. And a big part of that number is Valley Green, which we also believe we're not even sure we can get, correct?
No, it's my estimation that the special benefits are probably underestimated at this point. But to get a formal opinion on that, you need a full benefit appraiser.
That's not a normal place to try to assess, just in terms of protected class, coming up with money that they benefit from.
There's a landowner that's not the home. If you don't live in the homes, though.
I guess to his point, how much of the 1.3 is related to Valley Green?
500 or something.
I think it's about 300,000. In really more so, recognizing the methodology the benefit appraiser used, which was attempting to approximate flood insurance premiums should people purchase flood insurance. Just that opinion was formed in 2018. Since then, premiums only rise, and they'll only continue to rise until such time that this project's implemented. So the 1.3 million is underestimating, and from that perspective, recognizing her methodology.
So like my part that I'm struggling with mentally here is that the project is close to $11 million, roughly. We can't even logically come up with 20% in value for assessing. If these people aren't going to get a 20% increase in their value, or $2 for every 11 that we're spending. I mean, that to me is a giant red flag. I mean, we're going to spend $11 for, we can't even justify $2 in actual benefit to them. I mean, the argument in the papers is we're going to save $25 million worth of buildings. Are you? Because they're already insured. Unless you're assuming that federal insurance is worthless. I mean, if you're saying that, then maybe you can make that argument. Actually, you're probably putting those buildings at risk, because if the dike breaks between where the wall, well, let's say hypothetically, where the metal wall hits the hill, and somehow the pressure there breaks it open, and all these people flood, and none of these people have insurance. Now you really are wiping them out.
I think that the reply, once the people aren't required to have insurance, is that they should still
Get insurance?
talk to their insurance agent and get flood insurance, because you're next to a dike, and the insurance cost goes down to like 10% of what it cost before. So if you don't need flood insurance, like your house, you don't need flood insurance. The cost for you is going to be much cheaper than you if you were in the flood.
Aware, but we can't even come up with 2 for every 11 value.
Yeah, I think his point is that we think the appraiser that gave us the 10,000 per house was generalizing and just giving us a very conservative answer. And the flood insurance is going up 12% a year.
Well, we're also asking us to accept the 500, and the minute we accept that, we're in for $2.5 million. I mean, really, unless you're going to spend $1 million and say, we changed our mind, because phase 1 without phase 2 is worthless. Without phase 3, you're not going to get rid of flood insurance until you get at least to phase 4. I mean, phase 5 maybe you help the trailer park, but
Yeah,
phase
you
1 and 4
could
don't.
skip phase 5, I believe.
Correct, which is the eastern or westernmost portion of it that just protects the trailer park.
Yeah.
But I mean, I know, of course, the conversation with the mayor, he talked about potential funding with federal monies that we may get.
Mm-hmm.
That would make me feel far more comfortable if that took away from some of the stormwater, because what's the number one thing every council member here has heard? Why are our water bills so high? What are we going to do? We're going to slap $1 million in there. Conservatively. Realistically, it's probably going to be more because you're probably not going to be able to assess them.
Actually, there, if I might, I know this is a work session conversation, but would the American Rescue Plan funds, would this be an eligible use for those funds?
We think we could.
That would make me feel far more comfortable.
Yeah, we could put in, we could kind of conceptualize how much that would save on a water bill, typically.
It's not even a dollar for dollar because whatever. How much of the 1 million is it going to lob off?
700, and we were told we're gonna get 729,000.
Okay. So to me, if I can look at my neighbor and say, yeah, we put $500,000 on your stormwater, but we have green space, we have potential upgrade of the downtown just visually. I mean, you do lose some stock in terms of your affordable housing. 20 out of several hundred that we have in town. That sucks. But and assuming all those homeowners are okay with it, outside of one rental, which I'm not as concerned about. I'm more concerned with grandma losing her house, not Joe investment guy. Not really worried about him.
I think when we did the survey down there, it was like at least 80%. It was 8 out of 10 or whatever. How many houses were we looking at, or properties were we looking
Over
at?
13.
There's 12 full acquisitions. I think 10 responded.
And then,
Two didn't say no, they just didn't reply.
There's one of them that did not reply that's repeatedly asked us when they can be purchased.
Yeah, I think the problem is I think some of those people don't understand either. What's being proposed right now is partial, and I know we can change that, but we got,
Partial.
because only the ones in the red are full property acquisitions, so you've got at least another 4 beyond that that are losing their garage and their backyard, and
Put a giant hill. And
well,
I may be able to clarify that. Just
no.
no,
No,
take
that's
all.
not correct.
Take all.
So we had a few different meetings on this, and one of the council directions was to not do partials
Right.
and take all of them if the people were.
12 properties, that whole,
Well, because that's one of the benefits to the non-downtown residents is that, hey, we're going to take all these, plus it visually just looks a heck of a lot better. But you take all of them, and now you've got the downtown park, if you will. I don't know what you can.
We're talking a trail on the top of that dike too.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
So-
You have a river lock.
Yeah.
Creek lock.
maintenance road.
Just for clarity, we are, even though it says partial, we're really talking about full for all of these.
good point.
Correct. Yeah, this is a figure from the feasibility study. That change came in after the feasibility study was adopted.
And can you I believe I understood this correctly, that if, like, say, one of these properties in the lower has their house paid off, and they're not paying for flood insurance because they don't have to, they've chosen to accept the risk, if you will. And we would now, under these rules, would assess them. Didn't we talk about potentially a way to defer that assessment until they sold the property? Is there a way to do that? Yeah, we understand you're gonna get a $15,000 benefit. We're gonna defer the assessment until you sell it, but you owe the city that
Sure.
money. Can you do that?
for the elderly and military.
Correct, that's what I mean, for elder.
Yep.
I think that's the only people.
Elderly for sure.
Well, that's the people.
They have to
we're
meet.
working on.
They have to make income things and
I
that.
thought there's an active duty.
I'm
There is.
looking, visualizing a retired person who lives on a fixed income, and now we're gonna slap money on it. They're really not gonna benefit. I mean, they're gonna benefit, but they have no intention of ever selling.
And that rule is out there for any assessment, even if
so
we were to
we
do an
can't-
alley.
I just want that to be known, because I know we've all taken phone calls from people who are like, hey, I lived here, I paid off my house, I don't wanna pay this. Okay, sorry, Matt.
But that exception though is only for senior citizens and active.
Active military? Which means
Or
many are not
there's a
active.
permanent disability provision as well.
Okay.
But that should be known to people in the public that are concerned.
Yeah, I like the idea, just trying to picture some of those. It's hard to get where you're gonna have a 10-foot lane, if you will, or walking path, and then how much property then would be left from the end of that to, what is that, First Street? So that it is really a park, or is it just wasted land? Or, I do like the idea of more park for the city of Jordan, like you said, a downtown park sure would be nice for the people at my end of the town. It'd be nice to tie the old city with the new part of town being out there. Those are some positives. One thing I want to ask though, as far as times with those phases, as we talk, phase 4 is this much. Are we talking couple years? Are we talking 5 years? Are we talking 10 years? What's the process of that?
Yeah, full build out at this point we'd estimate to be around 2030, and every 2 years you're going to get into another phase here. So phase one we're initiating right now, which was design of segment 1, which is the green portion here. That green portion will go under construction about 2023 into 24 to get funding in 24. Once we get the funding for that next cycle, so now in phase 3 would be about 2025 into 2026. This phase 4, 26, 27, 28, somewhere in there, and then this last blue piece and the kind of that latter part of the 2020s. All of that is based on estimated funding levels from the DNR of roughly 1.5 million each year. That's how we develop the phases, because that's what they informed us they typically will fund to. Now, if the DNR starts funding our project a little more heavily, or that program gets a little more money through the legislature, or if the city council chooses to try to lobby to get more funds quicker, those are all things that could change that schedule too.
I'm sorry for more questions on that, but towards the end of the green phase and then a lot of the purple phase, there's already a dike of what you said was back in whatever. Mm-hmm. Is there any way, because I'm frustrated by this, because they're supposedly not legal, is there any way we take core samples or anything to find out? Are they up to grade, or are they?
No, we can't get it certified for what's there today, but we're actually not proposing full removal of what's there either. Okay. We're planning to put clay sort of on the back half of it, and that's what we're detailing in the feasibility report. And then the geotechnical consultant in this phase is going to detail that for us.
Okay, that makes me a little bit happier then.
Well, so realistically though, first phase, phase 2 would be the visual taking of the home phase?
Except for 1 or 2 properties, depending on how much money you have left out of this phase.
It's phase 1.
Phase 1, we're probably going to go to this first public engagement meeting. I've already heard repeatedly, like I mentioned, for one property owner looking to sell, try to see if we can find one more willing seller, if you will, that's really anxious to get out of there so you can avoid condemnation. We'll probably try to find someone else that's wanting to do that, and probably have 1 or 2 that goes in this phase. And then phase 2 would be the remainder of the takings as well as the actual construction of that phase.
And realistically, negotiating with the property owners, we don't necessarily care, right? Because as far as we're concerned, we're spending the same amount no matter what we do. So
you're not wrong.
It's beneficial. So I don't have to get upset when we're overpaying by 25% to make the people go away.
I have coworkers that have done project management of projects just like this, faced with that exact situation of challenging negotiations headed towards condemnation, and you're not wrong.
It's still your money, it's just from the larger pool.
Well, trillions don't get the same anymore, Mike.
It's coming out of your state pocket.
It's your state pocket. It's your local pocket. Any further discussion or questions for Mr. Wall? Councilman Williams?
As the phases go, they're projecting how much per year that they're going to give us, you're saying? And do we get it on the years that there's not another section of the levy being built?
And piggy bank it?
That's what I'm asking for, because when you look at the cost of the values, or of the levies, at one point in time on this thing, the 1.5 wouldn't cover it after we get it. So if we get to a standstill, do we do our project and then the city's got to kick in more money because you've already bought into this?
So I'm pulling up the memo here to respond to your question. There's a tabulation here that I've attempted to estimate the funding by phase.
Is that the one on page 7?
Yep. Page 7 here. So what we're going to be looking for from the DNR in this next round is 1.725 million. We're going to frankly articulate that through the course of demonstrating what our need is and how we're getting started on this, and we really need this to progress with the first phase of construction because we can't acquire 7 out of 10 houses and actually get started. So trying to demonstrate that to the DNR so that they can kind of up the list, if you will, to get that going. And whether that number moves a little bit up or down, that we're going to base it on need to make sure we get the project up and moving and don't just have a few houses laying out there. So hopefully Councilmember Whips, that answers your question. Each time we go around with a new phase, we're going to back it up with need to the DNR so they know exactly what we're expecting or where we're at a standstill if they come up short.
Yeah, if you look at what they gave to other communities in the past, what is it, 8-10 years? There's 2 million, 7 million, 5 million, 10 million, 400,000, 2.6 million. So it's not always uniform. It's more so based on need. This year they got cut. They didn't get the full 20 million. So it should be in every bonding year that we should be awarded money.
That's what I'm saying. So are you banking it or you're not banking it?
I don't think we planned on just putting it in the bank. I don't think we can do that, can we?
No.
So they have to set aside twice as much money on the years that we need to do a phase. In other words, or
Yeah, we'll ask for twice as much when we need twice as much.
And I would also look at that as you got less this time than I would have anticipated, and that's because their program was cut. So it's double what you're getting right now, but I think that's because this first award is smaller than you'll typically see, not because this is typical and the rest are double.
Was there any way before we approve anything that we can get guarantee that we can use that America First money?
I had the same question, so that's
Because, I mean, what we're asking us is to commit, and by committing, you're committing.
Sure.
You can't uncommit. And we have a lot of, probably we can get
a
this.
lot of money on nothing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, you can do that. Assuming that's not an option.
I guess I can't guarantee I can't guarantee anything, but
Well, we can't wait until we find that out. I mean, it's not
I
like
guess-
this 1 month.
We could wait 2 weeks.
Yes, you could wait 2 weeks. I don't know the duration you're going to go until you find that smoking gun of yes, you can assuredly go through, but we could report back with where
The
things
Fed's
are at.
very efficient, so I'm sure.
Right. That's what was in the back of my mind was how clear an answer are you absolutely going to get, but we can try for the best there.
It's a worthy question to answer, in my opinion, because the risk is front loaded on us, right? When we spend the first dollar, we bear the cost up to that first 2.44. I understand there's something that comes along with that, but it's also not inconceivable that the next budget, not this one they're debating now, but 2 years, 4 years, they have a deficit situation, programs get cut, and projects therefore get delayed, and it's happened, 3 times since 2004, based on this chart, so it's foreseeable that a deficit type situation.
I thought our cap never changes on this either. So
Okay.
that's different than what you're talking about, but I thought our cap never changes on this.
Your cap is going to change when the 2020 census kicks in. It's based on 2010 census right now.
I thought once we locked in, we locked in. That's been one of the selling points the entire time.
I think Mike's saying it will, but the number that's been cited will be updated based on the new census.
So our 2.1 gets updated to a new number is what you're saying. So
Yes.
then 2.3 isn't the cost of it. It's
Yes.
cost 2.3 plus whatever it gets upped.
yes.
4 people times different income
Correct.
figure is how that number was arrived at.
So each agreement you lock into, Robbie, for this first phase, you're locked in at 2.4 million. Your next amendment to this agreement is going to be under the 2020 census data likely, and so you'll re-lock in, if you will, if you want to look at it that way.
How dramatic is that? Because we've grown pretty significantly since 2010. Could it
Yep.
add $1 million?
I would doubt it would be $1 million.
But it could.
We can estimate it.
Well, because right now, what you're asking us to approve, we've got a lot of, maybe we get this money, maybe we can use this money, and possibly get cost. That's a big gamble. And we put our money up first.
They put some money up first.
No.
We match.
I agree with all that, but just keep in mind when we start this conversation with, and I'm all for what you guys are talking about, but there is a safety factor, there's some other factors that are really important for the community, for the future. Yeah, there's more to it than just that bottom line. This is something we've been talking about since the 60s, about taking care of some way. So I agree with finding those numbers out. This is just my personal opinion. But at the same time, just we shouldn't weigh it all on money. There is a safety factor and some other issues
Well,
involved.
we fixed the dike. I mean, the 60s flood wouldn't have occurred had they add that dike in. We would be
did.
sitting here going, there's never been a flood here.
I mean, the illegal dike, but if there's a backup, ice backup by
No, not that, the cement, steel.
What he's talking about is, you know how we used to have the big jump in Lagoon Park back in
Right.
the 60s that was dirt and that
That
washed
one-
out.
that
And
one's-
that's what flooded everything is because essentially the mill pond started draining.
yes, that did that, but we've also had ice buildup in other places that it did some flooding, like say, Reescraft Park and some other issues. There's a reason why if we don't have to worry about any ice or any flooding, why are we even sitting here talking about it? I mean, there's a reason for the craziness here.
Yeah, no, and I don't disagree, Bill. I think that's changed over time though too, because there was a time when this was not going, when the way it was told to us is that this was not going to help with the ice, and now it's a sure solution to the ice. And that's just changed along the way with the project. I don't know what's different between what was said to us back when we were originally doing this in 18 and those questions were proposed. I understand that it will likely could help with that in that situation, but you know, they said, well, no, it's not going to protect against that essentially for the ice piece. The increase in tax value that gets argued, well, you're taking away the exact same amount of houses when you cut down 11 houses if you figure they're $200,000 a piece. So
But
the
then-
reason to do it is not for the increase in tax revenue, because if it was such a great increase in tax revenue, then why have to bond, period? We'll be so confident we'll cover it with our increase in tax revenue to be able to cover the bond without having to do sewer and water.
And that will be part of this issue, because you take my house or any house that's down that still exists, you remove flood insurance on these other homes or all the homes, their values are going to go up, what, 10+%. You take that number, whatever that is in all lower town that's in the floodplain, that's going to probably take up that tax burden on those 12 houses you lost. So when you weigh it that way, that's a whole different.
Not really, because you figure in market value credit, your dollar for dollar on that increase is a fraction. You're not going to see increased revenue into the coffers of the city of pennies. Now, if you're talking assessment,
If my house, I guarantee, well, I don't have flood insurance, but if I did, you take that off, what is that? I think it was when I first bought it, was like $700 or $800 I took away, paid for it. My taxes now, my value is going to go up 10%. See, all those homes are 200,000.
your tax won't go up 10%. That's
You-
not how the
you
formula
take-
works. It's because of market value credit and
Well, I'm
market
glad to
value
hear that, if
exemption.
that's true.
No, it's true. Tom can explain it.
Well, you're adding theirs on the top, and then you're taking away the ones that have the market value credit.
Yeah, but it's all in the same pool of homes.
Yeah.
Your guys' thing says that it's going to add $2.4 million of taxable market value income to the city of Jordan. But at the same time, you're removing $2.4 million worth of homes, so it's a wash.
But I think the argument is his argument reversed, because those ones it's adding. So Bill's house is 250. It's adding another 10% on top of the 250, which is outside of that market value credit of the first 175 or whatever it is. And those other houses, you're taking all of the house, which is that credit where they're not paying on,
Correct.
and everything above it. So the other houses are it's a better trade to tax all the houses on top
Yeah,
of
but
what they're
that's
already paying
circular
compared
logic.
to the
If
ones
that
you're
was
taking
true,
off.
then assessments would be very simple, and you'd be able to get all of it in the assessment, if that 10% is accurate,
Yeah.
which we're not even really close to.
Wouldn't my value of my home go up 10% if I was no longer in the floodplain?
That's why we're saying you could assess you
Make a point on
10
it.
grand.
That's part of the reason we're saying you might be able to assess more.
Well, 10 grand, you're saying this house is worth 100 grand. He's saying 10%. That's not 10 grand.
That's because she based it on just what they're paying for flood insurance for
Correct. But I'm
10
saying
years
your
or
two
whatever.
numbers don't. If it's 10%, now that assessment value, like I just said, is double or triple that number.
We think it might be somewhere in between what she said and what you want.
Well, I'm not trying to hurt
You know what I
anybody, right? I mean, the whole point is to help them, but at the same time, like Matt, I think you used it as an example, right? What you're paying, if we could say, hey, you could pay for half, and it's only going to last you 10 years, you'd be like, yeah, sign me up tomorrow.
Yeah, sign me up tomorrow.
right? And then the people who are retired, which was the other concern, we can be like, well, yeah, you're going to increase, but you're not going to have to pay it until you sell it, which is basically your heirs will wash some benefit of some sort. But I mean, to me, yes, with all that, but you're asking us to trust a lot of maybes and assumptions. Hopefully, all go our way.
And that's kind of why we agreed with putting down the conservative amount for what the assessment revenue would be, because we don't want to disappoint you in the future. If we told you it was going to be $3 million right now, and then we get there and we don't actually assess more than, say, $2 million.
Well, this is
$1 million is a big gamble on.
This is also the first I've heard that our portion can go up significantly. As new.
Well, it's, just since you brought it up, I ran a little math on that. I was not elected to do math, but it is one of my several talents. I tried to just take a stab at what, for example, if median household income went from $65,000 to $80,000. I don't know if that's reasonable or not. That's a pretty big jump, I suppose. But and I added 300 households. Is that fair in 10 years? Good guess.
Sure.
So that if those two things change, our share would go from 2.44 million to 3.36 million. So it actually could increase by close to $1 million, depending on what we learn from the census.
So 50% jump.
So that's a pretty big deal. I kind of glossed over that.
We can look into it. I had run some other math a while back.
I
Wasn't
took
getting
a
that.
stab as far as the median income will probably.
But it's hard to speculate on that particular.
Well, how many have we added from 2010 to 2020, and what's our population, our home? That'll give you the number of homes. And
What did we have, 29 something on the sign in 2010? Or is it more than that?
I don't know. That's why I'm saying you would know the number.
4,000 something.
4,000. You guys send me a sheet every week that tells, or every meeting that tells me how many new homes that we've built and how many new permits for homes. So we should be able to figure out how many homes we've added since 2010.
Yeah, we certainly can.
So before I'm willing to vote on it, I need to know more specific on how that number's going to change, and if we can use the American funds. Me, now that I can't speak for these people.
It was 5470 at the 2010 census, and we're now about 6,700.
And but 8 years from now, when we're doing phase 4, and be double in size, they can't come back to us, can they?
Sorry, what was the question?
Not after the census comes out.
By 2030.
Yeah, it need to be complete by 2030 or 2031, 2032, really.
You'd have to be finished, otherwise they would update that
Right.
calculation.
Then you can have, they won't retroactive, say, hey, this was 11 million.
So if in the next 10 years you have one bad bond year where one bad year where the legislature doesn't provide adequate funds for them to do it, then you've got a second increase in 2032 because
Would that
there's not
second
much
increase
wiggle
just be
room.
for that last phase, or would it be retroactive for all of it?
I don't know the answer to that.
Well, if your cap increased at that point, it would
Yeah, it's
be
going to be the full
to
project.
that. Yeah, to your.
So hypothetically, we have one bad year, or two, where they don't fund it enough, it pushes us into the next census. Last phase, which is the big one, phase 5, it's a heavy one, that's like $5 million, I believe. The trailer park version, the last one. They could retroactive, and you could have to slap another $1 million or $2 million bill to the city if we wanted to finish it. In theory.
Yeah, if you wanted to complete that segment, yes.
So really, you have to just, to me, if you, those of us up here are deciding whether it's worth it, you just have to assume phase 5 is frosting on the cake and assume you're not going to get it.
It's 375,000 of the
Because you may
assessment.
decide spending an extra $2 million to the city portion for that is not worth it.
Right. And at that point, who's to say things won't change, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're going to shrink between now and then.
No, but we can do a lot of different way on a lot of different things.
The
But you and I
DNR
talked about
calculation
this.
changes, there's a lot of variables over a decade.
And nobody at the county's thought, hey, maybe $5 million for a property that's not worth $5 million, maybe we can move to a place where they would all be better off.
You can move them into city limits if you want to move them as a protected class. So you figure out where you want to move it to.
Let's not worry about that right now. Let's not even talk about that right now.
So phase 5 though, that in their own report, instead of 300K, that's 375,000 of the assessment value, Jeremy.
And that would be the underpass. Sorry.
It's 375,000 of the total assessment value for Valley Green is what's in their report.
Yeah, it's their assessment. Or assessment.
That's their assessment based off of the.
We can't assess them unless we do phase 5, right? Because they're not going to get all of that benefit unless we do phase 5.
A portion of them is protected by phase 3. Excuse me. Yeah, phase 3. To the west of
With 300,000 in theory, you couldn't even assess that until you did phase 5. And phase 5 could cost you 5 times that assessment just by an increase in the value of our increase in our population if we rolled into the next census.
Which is the only area that's actually flooded in the
So
August.
now that makes that 1.3 number even more worthless. Sorry.
So yeah, so what I'm hearing from the council is you'd like, more estimation on the cap
Yeah,
adjustment.
that one's a big deal that I frankly just glossed over until this meeting. That if I can reliably trust the brief internet research I did, our median income, that was actually a pretty good guess by yours truly. According to the internet estimates, it's at about 81,000 for Jordan. And if you take the population delta divided by 2.5 average household size, that puts it at 2,300 households. So the number would then, if those are accurate, the number then goes to 3.8 million. So it would be over 1.4 million higher than we currently thought. But anyway, you'll have more time and access to better data, so that would be a useful estimate to find out what we're.
And then the federal funding resource, we'll try to look into that and get some answers for you on that as
that'd be
well.
huge.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, we still have 8.0B.
And then here's from their next meeting.
(06-48-2021). I'd certainly take any questions that you have from here.
Thank you, Mr. Waltman. Does anybody have any conversation or discussion for the engineers?
Yeah, I have a bunch of different questions. So the stormwater fund, that's a direct, does that directly affect the water bills in Jordan? Is that where it's coming from?
Yeah.
Okay. And then the DNR funding that we get from the DNR on this, right now these are kind of, what are the annual amount that is showing, and I know that's 50-50 up to our cap, and I know the 500,000 is on the table right now. The subsequent years right here, that's still based on whether we do get it from the DNR based on the funding, or is that's not like a guarantee we know we're going to get in each one of those years as far as making sure the project's done by 2030, right? So that could change year by year depending on what kind of funding. Where does that kind of, maybe I missed that in there.
Yeah, I think there is no guarantee what the Minnesota legislature is going to do, right?
Right.
So to try to address that question, in the previous write-up, and there's a link to it right up top, there's kind of an annual funding amount that we researched and found that the DNR has put out there routinely. The funding amounts you're seeing in the tabulation that I have back up on the screen here, ranging from 500,000 this year up to 2.7 million, kind of at the peak as we get into the Valley Green piece. Those are common funding values the DNR has put out every other year when the bonding bill comes out. So, yeah, nothing's guaranteed, but I think these are reasonable income amounts from the DNR.
When you put up the slide with the assessment versus the bonding, you put it up towards the end. I guess I'm not tracking on that because
Which slide? Keep going back.
the one that you said finance helped you with.
Right here. Yeah, I was referring to these rows right here. Special stormwater fund and special assessments, and just recognizing that we've got 2.7 million of stormwater funds up front. Now that'll be bonded for, and eventually bond payments will get paid off by special assessments. Midway through the life of that bond. You can see it's sort of a negative value. Then your stormwater funds being reimbursed later on, effectively.
Is the question based on the timing of it? Because we can't assess the properties until they get taken out of the flood zone is the issue. That's why we can't just assess in year one.
Well, and that's, I don't know how long it's going to take for, how long when Moorhead or whoever did this, did it take for FEMA to react? We've been fighting them on wrong numbers for 4 years that admittedly they acknowledged were wrong, and it took them 4 years, I think, to fix the numbers and actually get it done this summer. So
At least.
Yeah, so to that question and the timing of this, we did, and I'd refer you to the previous write-up as well, but we're planning to do a conditional letter of map revision, a CLOMR it's called, during the design process, and this CLOMR will be filled out for phases 1, 2, and levy segments 1, 2, and 3 during this initial phase. So that'll get us conditional approval from FEMA before we start the work. We'll do construction, have to do an as-built that demonstrates we actually built what we intended, and then there's about an 8-month process estimated where we get the final letter of map revision. That's what gets us to these values shown in the tabulation of assessing in 2024, 2025 for that value. You know, we're accounting for all of that runaround work that you're referring to there. Got that included into the schedule.
Mike, so I know that, just so I have it clear, the best estimate we had for the city's contribution went up by about 800,000 as you put up, but then did I read right that we also kind of rejiggered our assessment number? It was about 1.3 and now we're at 1.8.
Yep.
So, okay, thanks. I just wanted to make sure I had that right.
So you account for that 6% annually that these assessments will go up because they're getting more benefit each of those times. The $10,000 assessments become 15, 5-6 years out. There's a pretty detailed tabulation in the packet here too that kind of goes through that.
Further discussion.
So by moving forward, if we move forward with this on the phase 1, which is 500,000, essentially because we're taking that 500,000, we're committing 500,000 to the project as well, correct?
Yep.
And council member, I think that's one of the hangups that we've been discussing is that, that's to your question about the DNRs. We have confidence based on past performance that these funds will be there, but we don't know that for sure. So the city's got to be the first mover up until that 3.2 million gets exhausted, and kind of only then do we start to see the big chunks come in from the DNR. I mean, they'll come in all along, but it'll be a 50-50 match up until that point.
When we did meet with them, they said that they've never not finished a project since they started this in 1979 or whenever it was. Once they start a project, they want to finish it so they have a successful levee or dike that they build.
So they've never not finished, they've never not got bonding?
They've
had years where there has not been bonding and they've had to pick it back up, because to us, given the length of time, that costs us a lot of money if there's been those years.
Yeah, they won't promise that they're going to get funding every year or every other year. But what they will promise is that they'll try to finish the project.
So for the phasing, I guess, and that was one of the things that I had a question about too, is I get engineer standpoint, it makes sense to keep going in order, but when the last leg of the project is the most expensive leg of the project, if you're running out of grant money, could you switch what order you do and meet in the middle or not?
Yeah, there's some flexibility here. The two that are tied together is levy segment 3, which is just across from Holzer Park, west of Syndicate, north of 169. That piece has to happen before the part between 169 and 282. So we have to build the pond downstream before we work on the stuff upstream. Other than that, could we do Valley Green sooner? Yeah, I think we could. I don't think there's a tie there. Could we delay this first segment? I suppose we may be able to do that as well if you want to build that at a different for yeah, we could kind of go back to the drawing board and phasing if you'd like to change something like that.
And could a few of them be coupled together, like 3 and 4?
Yeah, yep.
Because if we push towards combining those two, that takes out one of the phases, and then that takes out 2 years or 4 years of potential project.
Yeah, there could definitely be an angle here of lobbying to advance some of this work to try to get more money out of the DNR earlier in the process too.
Would make me nervous to hinge our finances on our ability to lobby. Good that it has been, but
I mean, so this, yeah,
that's a lot of stuff we can't control, right?
Sure.
I mean, and so that's a function of how the state's doing financially and how much relative sway Scott County has. Is scale still lobbying for us? That kind of stuff too.
But I think realistically, if we do move forward this, we would try and squeeze these together to get as much as possible.
Yeah.
Is my point.
Yeah, I bring that up because this tabulation that we're looking at is based on not doing that, but the city of Carver is doing that right now. That they're advocating and trying to lobby to advance some of their funding. So some cities do that.
I mean, for me on it to jump in and make a commitment on this right now. I know there's other things there too. I know there was some discussion with there's some homeowners. I know the whole jumping in with us and putting the levy up. There'd be a lot of homes that have to go through. Some of the homeowners there may or may not be wanting to make that move right now. Putting this commitment with that, also knowing that some of the unknowns of costs with our government giving us that funding, this project makes me a bit uncomfortable here. And I think the value of what we get, I want to certainly get those insurance premiums down. This makes me a little bit uncomfortable with some of the unknowns. And we have unknowns, but this makes me a bit uncomfortable with some of those things.
Yeah, I was on the fence before the city's cap went up by 800,000, and so it makes me all the more nervous. And that's a big number, and it's also includes parts that we can't control. For example, just like you're discussing, Councilmember, we know for a fact we won't get all of the assessment that we think we will. This is an estimate, and we'll have to get a better appraisal. But we know that some folks will just refuse to pay. They'll defer, which is something that maybe we can collect down the road. But I'm having a difficulty coming up with $3 million of value to the city on our water bills based on this, and I was a lot closer when it was 2.4 2 weeks ago, just being candid.
Well, I agree, and I'm motivated because I want to be able to address this issue too as well, and there's real concerns that people have for it. Just the cost to get it done, to the value. And I know I've been approached and people have brought up the flood in 1960 and how it flooded Jordan, but that wasn't just because of rainwater. We had whatever you want to call it, Lagoon Park ended up flooding into the creek and helped with that, and that was a big part of why that happened, and we've addressed that issue already. So that it is a 1% chance every single year that could happen. So it's not necessarily once in 100 years. It is a 1% chance, but I just don't. It makes me a little nervous right now with the cost. I did have one question. So if the project's still open when we did reach 2030 because of some issue that came up, the cap moves at that point. So that's where we were kind of discussing if we could get some things done earlier. Automatically at that point our cap would go up and we would be automatically on the hook for that $1.2 million more, 1.3. Is that how that would go?
Yeah, if you got into be 2032 or so.
Okay.
Of whenever that would occur that you
automatically jump. So if we're already at the cap, all of a sudden we would owe another 1.3 to continue the project, correct?
I mean, automatic isn't necessarily how I would phrase it, just because you're not part of that agreement yet. But
right.
I think what we're getting at is we'd anticipate the agreement reading that way. I don't know how the program would change over 12 years either. I suppose, but
Sure.
generally, yes.
Other thoughts?
Yeah.
Councilmember?
So a few things about talking, all this information that's been collected, all the work that's been done, the timing for actually getting funding from the DNR, all this work that's been put into it. And if we continue to delay this, the likelihood that there will be any type of future funding for types of flooding projects, any idea on that? Just hard to...
Be in the hands of the legislature, I suppose, as to what they would do. I mean, this program's been around for a while. It seems relatively stable, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, I do see the rising costs over time too. If we did get to 2030, it seems like as a growing community that works as a detriment against you. That cap increase seems to be increasing at a rate higher than your other funding sources would. Yeah, but I don't know if I'm phrasing that correctly, but like that jumps up by 35% or so in 2030.
And the other part is that funding that looked into at 700,000 or so that can be used towards this project. So we're talking about this likelihood that our cap will go up. That kind of fills that gap as well.
Just for clarification, you're talking
If
about the
we
American Rescue
use-
Plan?
Yes.
Yeah. I've spent that about 6 different ways already.
So that's the other thing to think about, looking at the 1.4 and 1.88 for storm water, and then the assessments piece of if we elect to consider this project and to use those funds, changing those numbers around and make this more favorable for really the entire city. Because if we continue to delay this and not do it now, it's just going to cost us more money in different ways. And the timing just seems, I don't know, correct, and it'd be silly not to do this.
Well, I wish I was that convinced. I've been struggling with it. I mean, just the cost benefit to me, we heard it characterized last meeting that, the benefit seems to be primarily accrued to a select number of homes downtown, primarily, not entirely, but primarily, and yet, we're talking about $3 million on everybody's water bill until that comes off. That's where I was stuck, 3.2, and that's maybe could be higher if we don't get the full 1.8 in assessments. That's a big investment, and I'm not sure I'm all the way there as far as what the return for everyone is. And I've heard from both sides too. I mean, I've heard from folks who really think we're not doing our duty if we don't get this done. I've also heard from folks who will pillory us if we do it. They don't want to pay it. They're paid off. They don't want to have an assessment where they're not paying flood insurance. So I'm not sure I sense public persuasion any one singular direction, but that's why we're here, right? We're assessing it out right here.
Well, and I understand when you're saying that part of it's going to go towards making refilling the water fund, but it really doesn't, because you got to borrow the 3.2 either way. So the 1.8's got to come from somewhere. So you're paying towards your bond, but not towards your water bill. I mean, that's the thing that I'm struggling with here. You're saying, yes, the assessments are going to come in, but the assessments are still only covering what you originally borrowed, so you still end up with $1.4 million in debt on your water fund at the end of the day. I mean, there's no way to skin that. It's not like we're putting up $1.4 million and all of a sudden we get 1.8 in an assessment and we can apply the 1.8 to the 1.4 and we're coming out good on it. Either way, whenever the special assessments come in, they're just going into what you borrowed for bonds. You're still putting 1.4 towards storm water, I guess.
Depending if we paid cash for some of it, or
Well,
if we were to have fund
I
balance.
can't get us to pay cash on hand for a parking lot across from the Pick the Pig. So I'm not very confident that we won't bond for this project. It is what it is, but the idea that yes, it's paying back the bond portion, but you still have a pretty significant hit to your stormwater, I guess, is what I'm driving at.
I'll caveat with I'm in the flood zone, just as a preface before I even say anything. But I think the other piece to take into account too is the liability piece of it, where there is a liability now. Yeah, we know we're talking about the benefit of the cost of flood insurance, but if there were to be a flood, because there is that statistical chance that there could be a flood, what are the damages that it is going to cost the city? Because there's very specific rules on building within a flood zone. There's very specific rules on repair and increasing home value. And if God forbid we have something happen next year, there's a flood that wipes out a huge chunk of the city, what are the repercussions of that? And are we doing what we need to be doing to defend ourselves from that liability as well? So there's definitely the cost aspect, but I think we also need to take into account the liability side of it of, we have this kind of hanging over our heads and eventually the hammer does fall. Are we going to be ready for it? Not saying like, hey, we've got to take care of this tomorrow even, but I feel like this is something we eventually will need to address, because if we don't, someday that 1% is going to click and there's going to be a lot of issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think FEMA put in that rule because you had people along Red River Valley and other places across the United States that after everything flooded out, they rebuilt and it flooded again the next year. And so they got sick of paying out insurance premiums to people that kept, it's like building a cliff in California.
I'm by no means, saying like, hey, that's what should apply here, but the rules are the rules, unfortunately, with that.
Yeah, but what I'm driving at is I think like they put that in because they're saying, well, if this is what it comes down to, that this big event happens, then you can't rebuild in that area to some extent because we don't want to have the risk of it happening.
Yeah, so what are the effects of downtown Jordan if we lose, a quarter or whatever of the downtown area homes are just gone and they're not going to be rebuilt? What does that do to the landscape of the city?
Yeah, and to me, that's the best argument to do it, is that, but then you have to factor that against the cost. Well, not only the cost, but what are the chances that happen? Yeah. We're talking. Go ahead. No.
With climate change and things, I won't take that chance. If someone's house is flooding, or the police department that we spent so much on, and all of that, and then all these streets that we're redoing, if all of that we have to repair, I'm not taking that chance. That just seems silly. And I get the cost. I live way up on the hill and higher elevation. I get that. And the water bill probably will go up. I get that. But thinking of what is our responsibility here, what is the timing, what is all of these different ways that we've considered how to be responsible, conservative in our financial planning for this project and do what is right, that it's going to affect the entire city, not just those that live in the floodplain, not just the businesses in the floodplain, but and then a new park and then cleaning up on First or down by that, all these things that have been carefully considered to make this project really benefit the entire city and where we're growing. We're talking about CIP a little bit and how are we growing and how can we have downtown and everything around here to continue to grow. But you think of if something comes up with flooding or whatnot, geez, all that investment or that planning is kind of gone. And I get the financial piece, but I just worry that if we don't do it now, it's just continue to be more expensive and we're going to be playing catch up. And that's, I get the argument and the discussion. It just seems like all of this planning and this commitment that we try to work towards this, we can't control a lot of things, but we're trying to be as conservative and plan as much as we can to make it work. It's a hard discussion when we're trying to represent the entire city. When some folks live on 169 on the other side, when some folks live up north, some people don't pay flood insurance, they own their house, but again, looking at the big picture and where we're at, it's a hard thing to risk. I don't know, this is where I'm at.
So with the people that have flood insurance, Tom, is there any issues with rebuilding in those areas, their homes, if they were flooded with their flood insurance? What is that? I mean, you're not an insurance expert, but
Just for
flood insurance, right?
Yeah, just for an example, we had a house that had a fire. They almost didn't get to rebuild because they wanted to build larger than they had, and they couldn't do that. And you have to rebuild within a certain time frame. And you have to follow. They had to follow some rules of flood proofing their their new construction of their rebuilding the building they had. And it was a struggle. It took them 8 months, I bet, to work through the
filled
DNR.
basement.
They filled the basement with cement,
Right.
is what they had. Yeah, so even if you had a fire and you lived in the flood
Fifty
zone,
percent of the damage, right?
Yeah.
Roughly,
Yeah.
if your home's 50% damaged or more. So if you're talking a $200,000 home, you have water that comes into it. You know, are you going to have $100,000 worth of damage by that water? How much water is it going to take to create that amount of damage?
I mean, we don't have floods very often, but we don't have fire. We don't have house fires very often either. But if a house catches fire, they may not be able to rebuild where they're at. If we had a tornado come through, those people may not be able to rebuild where they're at. So it's not just flooding that would hamper them. The value that they create and add to our community that help everybody else's taxes. So.
I was trying to allude to this in the last write-up too, but think about that in terms of duration. I saw you have South House on the agenda here. You're dealing with one property owner with a house that's not in the best shape. What if you had 100 of those Lower Town Jordan that you were dealing with, and how long would it take you to deal with all those from your perspective? I'm sure there'd be some pretty unique circumstances you'd be dealing with. The liability aspect, I don't know how to describe that in full, but that was on my mind, writing some of that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying. I think this is something that needs to be addressed. We want to help. I want to help, with the flooded area and have it not be a floodplain anymore. There's a lot of reasons. I think a lot of good ones were laid out. Just the whole downtown area being affected and what it could mean for Jordan. And I want to get to that point. I'm just trying to get comfortable. I think, like our mayor said, we're getting comfortable where we're at. Now a new kind of little bump got thrown in there with the funding where it is now, where we're looking at. I'm trying to get comfortable. I'm just not quite comfortable there yet with it.
I guess when it comes to timing, I feel like we're either going to want to do something now or we're going to want to wait another decade. Because otherwise we're going to have to deal with the same bump again when it comes to a 2040 census, at that same time crunch. And so I feel like if we're not going to do something now, you almost have to put it on pause for a full decade, because otherwise we're going to be facing this $1.3 million bump, and we're going to hit it if we don't get started in the next year or so.
I feel like we are.
We're definitely pushing it now, but if we don't do it now, I'm sure we're guaranteed to hit it. Where there's that chance we could have everything done by 2031, 2032, if it got moving now.
The entire time I've really struggled with this project. Some of my struggles have led to good things, and at one point we were told we could not special assess on this project. Then we looked into it and figured out, well, we were told we did not think so, and we got that piece figured out, that we can. Think, looking at years of projected numbers from the DNR, I get nervous because, and I get, we had a pandemic hit, whatever, but I think if you would have looked at the numbers a few years ago, we would have been expecting close to $1 million for phase one that we'd be having matched, is my recollection. We expected to have more money up front, and this came in significantly less than that. I'm confident, I guess, that the DNR, 1979 to now, I would bet that they'll finish the project. It's just at what cost to us. I really hate betting on the legislator that there won't be a hiccup year in here somewhere, because I just don't see with, in my opinion, the way inflation is going and the way that the housing market is going crazy, that we're not going to find ourselves back in another 2009. I just don't see the bottom not falling out again right now. At the rate that housing is increasing in costs in the last year.
Which which way does that cut for you? Honestly,
That cuts against it for me,
Yeah.
100%, because when it falls out, that's when everybody freezes up on their money, particularly the legislator. I don't have a crystal ball, but I can tell you that, when I've been looking at how much houses have gone up in the last year, and people's pay is not increasing at that same rate that house value is, you're going to run into shortages and problems somewhere along the line. And the borrowing stuff that they're doing is, we're back to the early 2000s with what they're doing right now in the banking industry. So I just don't see there not being another bottom fall out in the next 10 years, and that makes me really nervous on whether or not there'll be money there for them to work with.
On the one hand, too, I don't know how many hands we have, but I find it inconceivable that if we pass on this right now, we won't be back here in 2 years having the same conversation. And I guess I'm less convinced that doesn't mean you do it. I'm just saying that it's not like this is going to go away. And I'm not sure whether that future council will have more favorable numbers in front of them in terms of DNR funding versus assessments or not. If we decline at this moment, then I think it's a lead pipe lock that we'll be back here doing the same thing at some point. Again, that does not mean you do it, because I'm still all the way there on the cost benefit.
If we reflect on the past and we say that we've been passing this over and council's been passing the buck on this for the last 40 years, essentially, that gives me some leaning on how big of an issue has it been if somebody hasn't done it ahead of time. And it's hard to bet on 1 in 100 years. I get that. I get that math. It's hard. It's easy to say, 1960, there's been so many moving parts with this project along the way we first started off, this project wasn't even going to include Lagoon Park when it first started off, not Lagoon Park, I'm sorry, Valley Green when we first started off. We didn't even start including it until we realized that there was going to be a cap. One of the big issues for me is seeing these different changes. At one point we were told, this isn't going to necessarily help with the ice jam style flooding that's transformed to, I suppose it can't hurt it, right? It's not going to get any worse if we have ice jams. But the last change, I guess, is a pretty hard pill for me to swallow because it's always been 2.3, and to add another $800,000 on for me, I guess it's really difficult. Even with being able to do the special assessments and the possibilities. I wish our special assessment would have come back better than it did. I would have had more confidence in it. I don't have a lot of confidence in somebody that just says it's a blanket $10,000 per home. It's really tough for me to swallow that the benefit's going to be the same across the board when they initially did that. It is what it is. That's what we got. I don't know that there's anybody that's an expert in how they figure these out or how they do them. Doesn't seem to be. The description from Moorhead is, they kind of did it how they wanted to do it, and nobody really whined, so it turned out okay for them. But I don't know that that's the best practice either. Those are some of the issues that I've had with the project along the way. The bumping it up additionally, if it's not done in 10 years though, is a pretty hard pill. Never been a big fan of doing anything out of the stormwater sewer water bill fund. And as I said last time, I know we've got debt falling off, but we're going to look at the CIP next, and you're going to see that we have another big project we got to do at our water plant. And to me, I can guarantee that, that needs to be done, and everybody, and I'd rather put my eggs in that basket with the money, I guess.
All right. Any further discussion? Otherwise, I don't believe there's been a motion, so we would require a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve resolution 06-48, 2021.
Councilor Heimkes moves the motion, or moves the resolution, pardon me, as presented.
I'll second for a few more comments or
Yes.
questions, I should say. So talking about, again, pushing it down the road, kicking the can down, and for 2030, our projected growth going from, it just changed a little bit now for our cap to 3.2, and then in 2030, it's likely to go up to about 4.6. That number is just going to continue to go up, and that's just also concerning. And I get all the points that were already made. I really do. I'm wondering about what you briefly mentioned again today about this possibly combining some of these segments, or I think another thing throughout this entire process is that once we get started, we kind of have to finish almost all of them, except for maybe 5. Correct me if I'm wrong with that, but does that really throw off all these numbers in this entire plan? What we've kind of committed
No,
to?
I think that we would look to try to combine some of these through discussion with the DNR. I mean, I look at these 24 through 27 years in particular and say, yeah, I think that would make sense to try to combine these. And this tabulation of these DNR funding amounts were geared to hit the target the DNR told us of the funding range. To say we couldn't get, 1.8 million, 1.7 million combining those two in one cycle, I think that that's also within their range. So we would push to do that. I don't know that throws a huge wrench in things. I think it's helpful to stick to the order that we have in terms of, okay, doing this piece a bit over here first, kind of doing the mobile home park towards the end. I think there's a lot of public engagement and other considerations we need to put in the mobile home park that'll take a little while. But, I think we can look to try to lobby to get some of these combined, or rather, not even lobby, but talk to the DNR about here's our application for our next agreement that we want to get out of you guys, and here's why. That's going to be the name of the game along the way here. I know that at least tackled the first question. Was the second one answered too?
I don't remember. What was my second half of the question? Oh, do we have to finish this? Like, if we get going, we have to finish it pretty much, like phase 1 and 2. We can't just decide, hey, the money's not there, or something else happens that we have
So
to pause this
I
project.
haven't understood the DNR makes you finish it, but what we have heard is they always do finish it. Now, one other funding source for flooding that we talked about the DNR and I've looked into is with the Army Corps, where you folks sign on to do a project with them with a certain cost split, but then you give up entire control of the project. And the DNR explained to us, you go down that path, we've seen cities costs triple from what they were initially told. And so this program is pretty nice and unique, and we think perfect to your situation because you guys have control of the project along the way in terms of how it's designed and implemented, and then also, the stop-start button, if you will.
But if we decided to do it, we'd be pretty silly to pull the plug once we hit that 3 million.
Yeah, I'd agree.
There's no incentive for us to
Yep.
pull the plug.
Before you get to the benefits, you can assess.
Well, the one I think you'd struggle with is the last phase if you ended up out there, because the numbers shown differently every time. At one point we were 300, it's 262 in this packet. I think last week it was 375, whatever it is for Valley Green. And you're to that phase, which is the only area that's flooded as of recent. If that funding's going to jump another 1 point whatever $1.3 million, and you're going to assess 300,000 of it, are you going to spend another $1 million to are you going to spend 1.3 to recoup 3 at that point? I mean, that's the tough part of that number down the road, if that's the year that it jumps.
And that phase can be taken off if that's all
I get that,
future
but that's
council
the
feels.
only one that's flooded as of recent in
Yep.
the last 20 years. So that's the dumbest one to take off if you're going to have to shave one off, unfortunately. But you're not going to assess back the value of having to do that down the road.
And you're protecting lower income housing there too, so.
Yeah,
There's
well,
a lot of
them guessing
benefits.
them guessing at the numbers is as good as my guess that it's gonna tank. Call it a feeling. Call it what it is. I don't got a crystal ball. Who knows?
When you say tank, you mean?
I just mean I think there's going to be another drop in our economy. I think our economy is going to go into a recession again. I think our economy is going to struggle again. Once our printing money catches up with us, it's going to be an interesting period for a period of time, I think, in my opinion. Not an economics major, but it is what it is.
So question on that point of if we decide not to or elect not to do the fifth segment, the other improvements that we would have made up to that point though, would that not lessen the impact if there was another flooding event in there?
Yeah, it's
You'll
probably
pull
a detriment
pull out
to,
60 homes, right? Roughly.
sorry, I'm not, what are the questions?
So she's asking about the other phases other than Valley Green. In my
Okay.
recollection, initially when we were looking at that, is we thought we'd pull her out about 60 homes out of the floodplain, if I recall.
For levy segments 1 to 3?
The ones that are just going to do downtown.
No, it's much more than that. I don't have the tabulation in front of me here, but it's over 100 structures, as I recall.
Structures out of, 60
There's-
that I'm using is out of flood insurance, I think, maybe. When you guys use structures, some of the properties counted as two because you've got a separate garage and whatever. So there was different, you guys calculated different, but to my recollection, it was of properties, if we're talking PIDs.
Yeah, I guess
I'd have to go
I'd have
back
to
and
look it
look.
back up. There's 120 some structures roughly in Valley Green that we're talking about, some of which are even benefited by the first 3 segments, not even the one right next to them. There's some next to the police station, for example, that are benefited from these first few segments. For what it's worth, the special benefit opinion was only relative to those first 3 levy segments. She didn't provide an opinion yet on the last segment, segment 4, which would suggest that those special assessments could go up based on additional 65 structures that she wasn't told about at that point. There's 3 different parcels too in the tabulation, so I know Councilmember Whipsy talked about some of the numbers a little different. Just keep in mind there's 3 different parcels on Valley Green, one of which was split 150 in 2 different years there, and then the other 2 remain in 2027, I believe.
I think there might have been about 78 homes that were paying flood insurance.
Yeah.
The first time we looked at it.
That have
There was,
policies.
but there was more structures
Yeah.
than that.
So keep in mind too, there's people that pay straight cash for their home. They might be renting it out, what have you. And those folks don't have policies. I would say there's 59 policies the last time I looked.
That might be what it is. I'm remembering a
Yep.
number around 60 when we originally did this.
And then it's a different number when you look at parcels versus structures, and it does get a little complex.
Do we need better data on the Valley Green side? I mean, I guess that's a question to my fellow council members here, because it sounds like we're sort of guessing at the biggest single, kind of.
So to that point, I've considered that quite a bit. I felt like we're characterizing this lower, on the lower end, if anything. And I hear a lot of concern about, can you actually assess Valley Green this much? Do I really need to seek more data? I don't know how influential it would be to you folks if you don't think you're going to get the number that you already have seen here.
I would think it would go the reverse, right? I mean, if the confidence level is higher on the professional side, that we'll actually be able to assess more. Now, whether or not we ever collect on it is another question, but whether or not we can actually, assess more, that might help. I mean, that might help paint the picture that maybe that 1.8 is more like, I don't know, 2.5, pick your number, but if we're having the biggest amount of angst over kind of phase 4 and 5, and that's the biggest chunk of homes or structures pulled out of the plane. Maybe we owe it to ourselves to do better homework on that. I hear what you're saying too. That's going to cost money, and that's going to take time. And
It's not really going to be functional until, 8-10 years from now.
yeah,
To when that cost would actually be in front of the council at the time.
Here's what I can tell you, Mike, is Mayor is down the road for 2 years waiting for more and more information. And I think what it boils down to, it is one of those issues that's a very split issue. It's not putting in a splash pad at Lagoon Park that 90% of the people can get behind. This is a thing that I would agree from my public feedback that several people in the floodplain recommend that, we have to do this. I've really only had one person I've talked to outside of the floodplain that has told me that we should support this. And I've had a lot of people tell me outside of the floodplain that we shouldn't. And I've got the same feedback it sounds like that you've gotten, in that this is a very divisive, split issue.
Well, let me add to that, because I think I've heard from just as many people in the floodplain that don't want us to do this because of the assessment piece. That they're not in a situation, they're in a situation where that would be a net negative for their property, or so the perception was. So that complicates things for me, as I mentioned. And then also, I think to your larger point, we're dealing with a lot of imprecision here. We don't know, of course, even within a reasonable guess, when or if a flood of the magnitude we're talking about would ever happen here. There's been a lot of citations, 1965, and I've heard a lot of competing stories about what actually happened there, whether if we had a similar amount of rainfall, whatever happened. The point is that we don't know. We're dealing with a lot of imprecision, and that makes us uncomfortable, and it probably should. But I guess we're going to have to get comfortable with we're never going to have the type of precision we want in order to spend this kind of money. When we built the sewer interceptor, it was pretty black and white. We knew what we were getting. We could very easily describe the benefit to everyone in town, and this is not that. Sorry.
So thinking back then of when it floods again, or when there is an opportunity to do something else, what is going to, other than having exact amounts or more precision, what is going to help with moving this forward? It sounds like it'll never benefit everybody in black and white, thinking dollars and cents, and there'll never be more precision. It'll never be cheaper. There's a lot of unknowns. So if we don't move forward with this today, it seems like, again, we're never going to move forward with a solution, and we're just kind of gambling on the rest of the work that we're planning and envisioning for, yes, our downtown, but 169 up there, all of that area, we're just kind of gambling on it with lack of protection. So I'm wondering, we talk about we want to help, we want to do something, this is our opportunity. So what else?
Well, you're gambling on whether or not, in my mind, the 1960 is going to, the levies that we put in, though uncertified, are going to hold or not. That's what you're gambling on, is levies that have withstanded every other rain event since they've been put in, whether or not they will continue to hold. I found it really interesting, they won't certify our levies, but if we incorporate them into part of this floodplain, they'll certify that. It's just asinine.
Is that true?
We do some work on the levees, adding a clay layer to the back end of it. There is no levee segment along this first piece here today that was most nearly at risk in 2014. I think that was about a 25-year event. It was kind of up to some of the rear houses there. So a 50-year event, I think it's fair to say you'd have water creeping in on the First Street side and then flowing down towards 2nd Street behind the levee.
And you still have properties that are prone to flood because we start here, so you still have all of the ones that buildings and stuff got carried along the opposite side of Lagoon Park, that they get their water bill increased. We benefit the 70 or 80 properties, whatever it is down here, plus Valley View, and they still get to keep paying for flood insurance and have their home flood out.
Helena Street, you mean?
Is it Helena, South Broadway, whatever one Lucas's live on?
South Broadway, Helena.
Probably got about, I don't know, 10, 12 properties down there along the way, maybe.
Where Lucas is 145 right there.
Yeah, but then you got South Broadway, that's, I mean, I think it's about 10 different properties.
Gossies are on Helena.
All right, in the interest of moving us along, I'll open it up to any other council members for final comments. Otherwise, there has been a motion and a second, and so we would have a vote before us on resolution 648, 2021. Any further comments?
I have no further comments, but can we do a roll call vote?
Absolutely. Roll call having been requested. Well, no, sorry. I almost just said the thing that I normally say. Roll call being requested. Councilmember Shu.
Aye.
Councilmember Hanke.
Aye.
Councilmember Schmidt.
Abstain.
Mayor's a nay. Councilmember Maniak.
Nay.
Councilmember Lips.
I'm an A.
There being 2 ayes and 3 nays and 1 abstention, the motion does not prevail. The resolution is not advanced. All right.
And that is totally different than this article here, where they said that it's a high priority, and they even talk about the risk of flooding from internal water that runs off of 169, and that it does affect us, that in Valley Green that is not a part of Valley Green. Well, hopefully you enjoyed. It's in their own words.